So my name is Blair Stone-Schneider, and I am the executive director of Sophie's Hope Foundation Cure GSD1b. That's my professional title. I'm also known as mom to a GSD1b daughter named Sophie, who is 16 years old. So we have been doing this rare disease thing for well over a decade now. Prior to coming on board with Sophie's Hope and Cure GSD1b, I was mostly in environmental science, but I've always worked with communities in some capacity, kind of as a liaison between science and a community. And so this position has been an ideal fit in that way because I live this disease daily. We live it 24/7. And so it didn't feel like much of a jump for it to also then become a professional endeavor as well. And obviously, it's incredibly meaningful because this is our life too.
So I'm Jamas LaFreniere. My professional title is actually I work in technology sales full time, but with the rare disease community, I'm the president and founder of Sophie's Hope Foundation, which we'll obviously discuss a lot more today. My daughter Sophie is the driving force behind this. I have another older daughter, Allie, as well, who does not have GSD1b, but Sophie is 7 years old and was the inspiration behind kind of starting Sophie's Hope Foundation and Cure GSD1b and all the work we've done over the last 5 years.
So GSD1b is a bit of a mouthful. It's glycogen storage disease type 1b. It occurs in about 1 in a million. We think 1 to 2 per million, depending on which data you look at. It is evenly distributed across the world. There are some pockets and places that might have a higher rate than others. Generally, it presents in infancy with severe and profound hypoglycemia, enlarged liver and kidneys. And then what's characteristic of the type 1b subtype is also severe neutropenia, which often presents in recurrent and life-threatening infections and inflammatory bowel disease. As genetic testing is becoming easier to access and the cost has come down, genetic testing is by far the gold standard for diagnosis, and we're seeing it diagnosed earlier and earlier. Part of that is increased awareness, and part of that is just access to testing, to genetic testing. Prior to genetic testing and in places where genetic testing may not be as accessible, liver biopsy traditionally was the way to diagnose, and that obviously took longer. Most children are diagnosed in the first 2 years. There are definitely exceptions to that, my child being one of them. Depending on the severity, it's considered a very severe disease and a severe form of GSD, but there can still be some variation, and that can determine how quickly patients get diagnosed also. So management really has multiple fronts in type 1b. So you have the metabolic piece. These patients are not able to fast. They can't access stored glucose in the liver in the form of glycogen. So they have a trap door for that energy. The trap door is locked and the energy can't get back out. So what you have to do is provide them with a slow and steady source of carbohydrates. In the early years, in the first 1 or 2 years, that means feeding sometimes as often as every 45 minutes with special dairy-free, low sugar, usually soy-based formulas. And then eventually, usually between the age of 1 and 2, when patients can tolerate cornstarch, which is the primary treatment, there is no FDA-approved treatment for GSD1b yet. Cornstarch is the mainstay of therapy, then it's slow, gradual introduction of cornstarch, and then those will take on more frequent feedings around the clock. So it goes maybe every 45 to 90 minutes in infancy, and then eventually, ideally, feedings can get spaced out around every 4 hours if you're lucky. Sometimes it's less than that for many years, and obviously that goes through the night. The nights are no exception. And then in terms of the neutropenia and the inflammatory bowel disease, for like the last, I would say 30 to 40 years, drugs like GCSF have been used to try and increase the number of neutrophils, increase the function. It's been moderately successful. There's been new drug repurposing for a drug called empagliflozin, or Jardiance is the brand name in the US, that is helping with neutropenia now and is also helping with some of the inflammatory bowel disease components. Managing the inflammatory bowel disease is quite challenging also because while it's like a Crohn's colitis, it's not exactly the same, and some of the treatments aren't as effective. So that's a big piece of management that we're all still hoping we can work towards.
I think if you look at in general, the importance of diet too, right? I mean, we talk about cornstarch is kind of the medicine, and as is Jardiance at the moment for the neutropenia, but diet plays such a big role in keeping kids, adults healthy, but also kind of giving them, like you had mentioned, you can't really fast. So the timing of meals becomes critical. The amount of carbohydrates is critical. So it's a combination of a lot of different things in how you plan this out and making sure that everything's mapped out. So I mean, it's a lot of management of the disease. And I think we all kind of look at it and say cornstarch is the treatment, and it truly is the kind of the medicine of it. And then we kind of layer on top the importance of diet. I mean, there's some great things happening, right? And I think we're kind of taking a little bit of step back. The timing right now is not great, but there had been some really good momentum in general for rare diseases, right? I think we see within GSD1b and in general mRNA as a really good option, when you start to look at economics, safety, that sort of thing. And we know within GSD1b, due to some mice studies we've done, that could be a viable kind of opportunity for us. We're also seeing gene editing, right? I mean, we've seen kind of the news press releases on it. GSD1a is a disease similar to GSD1b, and they're going through some clinical trials with gene editing. So I think from a genetic treatment, there absolutely is reasons for optimism, right? I think we've done a lot of the basic research. We have a good understanding of GSD1b. I think what will always be the hurdle, unfortunately, is less about the science and more about the economics and the business model, at least here in the US, of how drugs are developed, right? And where GSD1b fits in the spectrum, where we are ultra rare, nobody's going to get rich, treating or developing a treatment for GSD1b. So we've had a really difficult time partnering with industry, trying to find the right partners. And we'll get into it a little bit more. We'll talk about the natural history study, things that we're doing to kind of boost our image and profile and make ourselves almost more attractive to pharma companies. How do we de-risk the investments that they need to make? So again, in general, we're very optimistic. The science is there, whether it's mRNA, AAV gene therapy, drug repurposing. I mentioned the success we've had, or actually Blair brought it up, for using Jardiance, which is a type 2 diabetes drug, to help our kids and our patients treat the neutropenia within GSD1b. So yeah, so we're seeing things come along. I think always our challenge will be the economics of it. As a scientific community, we're doing amazing things, and we need to figure out how to fund these things and how to scale for 10,000 rare diseases. How does that scale? How do we make it work economically? I went back 5 years ago. I've always known we needed a natural history study. It's that thing in the back of my head that's like, we don't have this. To be fair, a lot of rare diseases don't have it yet, but it's just something we've kind of known is critical. So I think there's multiple reasons, right? I think the first is continuing to kind of improve our base understanding of GSD1b, right? Let's learn by looking over a 5 to 7 year period and meticulously documenting how this disease progresses. There's certain things we're going to look for. I think no matter what, this will lead to improved care, right? Today is one of the hopes. We would expect it to help with the design of any future clinical trials, but even before that, treatment, development, and that sort of thing. And like I mentioned earlier, we're trying to move the needle and get industry excited or interested in working with GSD1b, and kind of this would help build on our base, right? We've got a registry, we've got a well-engaged community. We're doing all these things. We've got good basic science. And I think adding a natural history study on top of that de-risks and actually takes a huge investment out of, whether it's an industry partner or academia. So these projects, I think the reason a lot of folks don't do them is they're incredibly expensive, they're time consuming, and they're, I think, very intimidating, right? And so I think for us, me especially, until I had Blair on board, it was just totally out of the realm of possibility. Didn't have the bandwidth, I needed somebody that could, partner with whoever we're, working with on the natural history study. So I think there was a big intimidation factor, and Blair and I got to the point and consulting with our scientific advisors, right? And talking to a lot of different folks about where we are and what we need to do. It came to a point where it's like, we just got to do it, and we feel like we have found the right partner that treats a lot of GSD1b patients. But Blair, I'll tell you, we might be a year and a half into like planning, developing protocol, working through it, and we're still, not started. So these projects are a beast and very expensive, and we'll continue to have to fundraise for them. So I think it's a cornerstone thing for us to do and every rare disease org to do, but there are a lot of challenges with cost and resources and being able to do that.
I would add just one thing to that. I think a prospective natural history study is really key in the timeline for GSD1b right now. If we look at the drug repurposing piece with IMPA or Jardiance, because the data that exists, the retrospective data is really covering years where that drug was not available to patients and it wasn't a piece of management. And it's gone to now being such a key piece of management for the majority of patients that we really need that prospective data going forward, because it's been challenging in the past to think about how we could address both the liver piece and the bone marrow piece in GSD1b, which makes this subtype really tricky. And so the likelihood of being able to manage the bone marrow piece with a repurposed drug really has changed the potential outlook for a lot of other aspects of treatment as well, including, gene therapy and those kind of things. If the bone marrow piece can be managed with a drug, it really was a game changer in that way. And so we felt like the timing was really key there.
Sophie's Hope Foundation is something that my wife and I started back in 2020, basically within 6 months of Sophie's diagnosis. I think when she was diagnosed, it was just, there wasn't anything out there, right? And I think we talk about kind of what motivated us. And at first, to be completely honest, it was, we just knew we weren't going to sit on the sidelines. We thought we just raise money, hand it to somebody, and they develop a cure, right? That you don't know how much goes into this. So the initial thought, that was it, was, hey, we're just going to raise money. We're going to have this 501c3. We're going to give it to somebody really smart, and they're going to figure this out for us. Now, that is absolutely not how it works, but I'm glad, we jumped into this, developed the 501c3. We've got our community behind us. We started fundraising right away, even before we had a plan, which was really actually super helpful. And we just started building this like web, we call it, right, of patients, families, doctors, researchers, just reaching out to everybody and kind of building this network of folks that cared about GSD1b and were willing to help. So it started very organically and just grew kind of over time. And our mission statement now is to drive better outcomes for GSD1b. I think originally we said cure GSD1b, right, which is still the ultimate mission. But I think for us, just continuing to drive better outcomes for patients and families and improve the quality of life is our true mission statement, right? And under that, we have three core kind of fundamentals or pillars, right? It's driving research. I mean, that can mean funding it, that can mean getting people together to collaborate, finding a grant somewhere, but we are trying to be the driving force behind the research happening for GSD1b, raising awareness. And that could be just things we're doing today. It can be, getting the community involved. It's doing things with the FDA, right? We had a listening session with the FDA to educate them on GSD1b. And then the third pillar, which will kind of dovetail into what is Cure GSD1b as an organization, was building community and providing education for the GSD1b families. Those are really the three pillars: driving research, raising awareness, and building community, which includes education and all that fun stuff. And I think what I realized early on, and this is kind of leads into the terminology of Cure GSD1b, was that I couldn't do this alone. I could raise money, I could do whatever, but if we didn't get organized as a community, meaning where are the patients, are they involved? Do they have resources? We weren't going to go anywhere. And it also, I was going to need help to scale as well. So I think within 6 months, I kind of just came up with the idea of just kind of creating this other platform, I'll call it, of Care GSD1b. Separated out the website. Sophie's Hope Foundation fully runs and funds and pays for everything for Care GSD1b, but we were able to create a really purpose-built website for not just newly diagnosed, any patients, caregivers, doctors, researchers. It's a place where we put dietary information, anything like that, so that we were able to separate it out from kind of Sophie's Hope Foundation and not make it so busy. It also gave me the ability to kind of bring the community in so that it wasn't just about Sophie, it was about curing GSD1b, right? That's the ultimate mission. So whether you live in any part of the world, you're a part of this, and we're trying to bring people together. So yeah, so that was really a Cure GSD1b is really a platform that helps our patients and people get information. And it also allows Blair to kind of run some different social media channels for us as well, which is very helpful.
As James said, it was evident from the beginning that there was room for a community to grow. We have patients all over the world, different cultures, different languages, coming at this disease from very different perspectives. But the common goal was to improve outcomes for our GSD1b patients, be they adults, at which we don't have that many at this point, or children who are newly diagnosed, that whole spectrum. And so what we've done in the last few years, especially, is create some programs to kind of build a community around these goals. And so that when, the cure comes along, we have a community that's well established with trust and strong enough to be ready to take on something like a clinical trial. You have to have patients who are willing and able to do it. And so we felt like we really needed to build that. And so that's what we've been doing. We have peer support networks, direct peer-to-peer mentoring, which has been really key. That's connected a lot of people throughout the world. We've just been building up our contact registry as well, which is a huge effort. Eventually, we would like a formal patient registry. That's down the road. We have all sorts of education and outreach materials that we've made, that we have translated into 10 or more languages, be it like a newly diagnosed patient packet or a fundraising toolkit, information that they might find helpful that can improve management, that can connect people, that can give newly diagnosed families hope. Those have been really key. And we also have established a couple of different support group calls for different segments of the community, be it teens and young adults, or a larger community call where, we talk about a certain subject each month. We also developed what we call our Ask the Expert webinar series, and that was designed so that we could hopefully improve access to expert information regardless of where our patients were, because many of our patients will not have access to experts in GSD or even metabolic experts. And so that was a way that we felt like we could really try and, bring the education level up and have access more equitable regardless of where patients lived. So that's been hugely successful. We usually have anywhere from 15 to 20 countries represented in terms of participants on those calls. We translate into 3 or 4 languages at a minimum for each webinar. So those are some of our biggest projects in the last few years and have really been great for bringing people together. I would say the first thing I would want to relay is that it's about more than cornstarch. I think sometimes, be they physicians or other healthcare providers or patients and parents, see that a disease is treated with cornstarch and it loses a little bit of seriousness. It's something you can buy on almost any grocery store shelf. And so I think in some ways that kind of works against us. The fact that it's ultra rare also does not help. Most physicians will never see a GSD1b patient. So I think what I would want to relay is this is a serious disease that impacts more than just blood sugar. It impacts, so many things that can be, I think sometimes get a little bit lost. And in terms of management, it's an incredibly high burden in terms of management for patients and caregivers. I mean, we're talking about feeding babies literally every hour for years on end in some cases. And one missed dose, one missed alarm, sleeping through alarm in the middle of the night can literally be life or death for our patients. So I think those were the things that I would hope any healthcare provider, be it a metabolic geneticist or a general practitioner, that would be the few first key takeaways, but I could talk about it for a long time.
Yeah, and I know, Blair, you're passionate about this, and we've talked about it too. And we're starting to see a little more, I don't want to say interest, but a little more conversation about it, is kind of the mental health aspect of it, right? That yes, this is a metabolic disease treated with cornstarch. But you got to remember, not just the patients, but also the parents are either waking up in the middle of the night 2 or 3 times, sleep deprived. But, the patients, like, this is a really difficult disease, to handle. There's oftentimes G tubes involved, body image. So I think taking it very seriously from a mental health aspect, and I think that could go across every rare disease, other things as well. But I think we're starting to finally see, especially in certain countries or at certain facilities, where there is that like mental health component of how do we support the patient better or the family better than just here's your cornstarch regimen, right? And treat patients as, whole people, right? And make sure that we're taking care of the mental health aspect of it as well.
Yeah, and realistically, 10, 20 years ago, there were not many adults
Mhm.
surviving into adulthood with this disease. And thankfully, that is changing. We're super grateful for the progress that's been made there. But in that progression, we also have to be realistic that the burden of this disease is high. And living with this disease for 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 years, hopefully, for many of our patients, we really do have to look at it in a much more holistic way, I think, in terms of how do we support the whole patient, because just the demands of the disease alone and the fact that there's really no wiggle room for error it's really difficult for a lot of patients and caregivers as well. So
How do these patient-led initiatives, accelerate research, or, why is it important to have these? And I do think that that's critical, right? There's 10,000 rare diseases out there, plus there's probably a lot more than that. And it's what I see is, everybody, like, we all want to work together, but everybody's fighting for the same scraps, right? The same doctors, the same researchers, the same grants, the same funding, which is getting harder and harder to come by. So, what I try to tell people is if we don't exist, Sophie's Hope Foundation, Blair, myself, the other advocates we have out there, I can be completely honest and say nobody's going to do anything, and that's the stark reality. And, that's when I started to kind of peel back the onion when we started Sophie's Hope Foundation. There were people that cared. I mean, there were some great doctors, there were some great things happening, but at the end of the day, if you don't have your own organization that's kind of making noise and trying to do things differently, then you're going to get left behind, and there are some great things happening in science that we're seeing, but they're not going to come find you. Nobody's going to come and say, oh, look at this little GSD1b, I'd really like to fix this, right? Or something like that. So I think being, loud and raising awareness, but doing things the right way and kind of meticulous, I think puts yourself and your disease in a light that's really needed, to get the attention of those folks. So I think from the rare disease perspective, I think having that patient-led organization matters for that. But then also everything comes back to how does this help the patient, right? Every grant request we get, the big question is, how does this improve the quality of life for GSD1b, or how will it? And that's really what it comes down to. So I think by having patient-led or parent-led organizations, you have the right thing, the right ideas at heart.